Okay. Is everyone ready? Okay. So I'm the first speaker. So, a nation that is strong in the face of rising seas, extreme weather, and shifting climate, where communities thrive despite the challenges of a changing world. In an urgent debate on climate action, it's time for the US to shift its focus toward adaptation, prioritizing strategies that directly address the problem. While fighting against climate change is crucial, adaptation offers immediate solutions to those who already feel this effect, so ensuring a safer and more secure future for all. So, hi, I'm Onyx Smith, and my group will be discussing the ongoing climate change. It is important that we reevaluate our strategies and consider a more important shift. Today, I present the affirmative case for why the US should prioritize adaptation over fighting climate change. By doing so, um, we not only confront the major challenges, but also lay the foundation for a resilient and sustainable future. So, moving to my first point, it's about increasing climate related disasters. So, wildfires have become more frequent and severe in many parts of the US due to a combination of factors, including water temperatures, drier conditions, and increased fuel loads. The Western United States has been particularly affected with large destructive wildfires becoming a regular occurrence during the summer and fall seasons. So, for example, the 2020 wildfire season in California alone burned over 4 million acres of land, making it one of the most extreme fire seasons on record. And so the increasing frequency and severity of climate related disasters in the US underscores the importance of prioritizing adaptation efforts to protect lives, property, and ecosystems from the impact of climate change. By investing in infrastructures, disasters, and community resilient measures, the US can better cope with the growing risks by climate related hazards and build more sustainable and a resilient future. Moving to my next point, it's economic benefits. Adaptation can stimulate economic growth and create jobs. Investments in infrastructure such as flood barriers, green spaces, and drought resistant crops can not only enhance the community, but create employment opportunities in construction, engineering, and agricultural divisions, which contribute to economic development. Investing in adaptation can also create job opportunities and stimulate economic growth. According to a study by the World Resource Institute, every $1 million invested in natural disaster resilience can create 11.6 jobs, compared to 5.2 jobs for the same investment in traditional infrastructure projects. Additionally, adaptation measures such as ecosystem restoration and green infrastructures can provide eco benefits such as improved water quality, biodiversity conservation, and recreational opportunities. So, in short term, adaptation can be more cost effective, and immediate measures to protect against extreme weather events like rising sea levels and changing precipitation patterns can save lives and resources. Um, these measures provide tangible and immediate benefits while we work towards a long term and sustainable solution. In many cases, adaptation measures can be more cost effective in the short term compared to like the larger scale mitigation efforts. So some like solution for cost of climate change. So for example, we can end efficient fossil fuels and put a price on carbon. We can invest in innovation and new technology and better management of overall energy system for in building sustainable and resilient food system. So in conclusion, prioritizing adaptation is not a fight against climate change, rather is a strategic and effective approach. It allows us to fix and present while laying the groundwork for a sustainable future, and embracing adaptation as a proactive and empowering response is the challenge we face. And our approach is not passive, it's proactive, and the reality of change, the reality of challenges we face today. Thank you.
Okay, so the first question I have is that a study done by the PBL, sorry, I'm trying to find it now. Netherlands Environmental Assessment Agency found that over time, the cost of mitigation is actually going to be lower than that of adaptation because mitigation's upfront costs are higher, but over time adaptation will cost more. And they said about 100 billion US dollars. So, how in the long term is adaptation going to be cheaper than mitigation?
Well, I think that we need to like find a solution now. So like I think if we find a solution now and like what's the word? Like keep like building off of that, I feel like it will create like a cheaper, I don't know how to explain it, but like a cheaper um wait, let me restart. So like I feel like we need to find a solution now and then we can build off of that. So I think if we just keep proactively building on a solution, I feel like it will just be like cheaper because we're just finding new ideas, if that makes sense.
Thank you. And then my next question was that you mentioned wildfires and that um, like the US should take steps to adapt to these in order to avoid like any economic losses and things like that. But like most studies have shown that Canada, Spain, like Portugal, Greece, Chile, like these countries also really suffer. So how is us prioritizing our own adaptation ethical versus just mitigating the causes of these wildfires so we can help other countries as well?
Can you say the question again? Sorry.
Yeah, so basically, like, just like, how's it ethical that the US chooses to adapt for themselves rather than mitigate their like carbon emissions and things like that that are causing these wildfires for other countries as well?
That's a great question. Um, I think, well, I just think that we need to just focus. Honestly, I have no idea. Does any of my team members want to chime in?
Um, for when I was writing mine, these adaptations that we were making, we said that we were like making them for these developing countries. So we weren't like making them for like the US. Because the US is like not hardly impacted, but like not as badly impacted as these developing countries. So most of like um these adaptations that we're making at these developing countries. That's what I have.
Okay, thank you guys. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you.
Okay, I think it's my turn. So, I'll be talking about how mitigating climate change. So, mitigating climate change is a complex challenge that demands both immediate action and commitment to long-term strategies. And normally, when we think about mitigation, we often think we know that it like can take a while to implement, and then it often doesn't handle current situations. But I'm here to talk about why it does actually have like more immediate effects, and it can have practical effects too. And my first point are about state laws that have had practical day-to-day applications. So the first one is Newsom's Plastic Pollution Prevention and Packaging Producer Responsibility Act. And that one, it's a long name, but it's about how in the upcoming years, about how all like single-use plastic, going to be a ban on single-use plastics in California, and that can already be shown by, sorry, there's like a weird announcer thing going on, but that can be shown, and like there's reusable containers at 1901, and there's like the reusable containers at Express that we can see on campus. And there's also, and that works to like reduce the use of single-use plastics. And there's also a bunch of like refill water stations around campus to promote the use of reusable water bottles. And there are like compostable containers and utensils like in the food dining halls around campus. And you might ask like, oh, why is like plastic pollution important to climate change and greenhouse gas emissions? But according to an article done by CU Boulder, the refinement of plastics emit an additional 184 to 213 million metric tons of greenhouse gases each year. So that's like a big part of greenhouse gas emissions that we need to mitigate. And then another legislation that California has pushed through is the California Climate Commitment, and it just works to like shift towards like clean energy in order to mitigate fossil fuels. And then according to like the California government website, in the past year or within the last year, 1 in every 4 cars sold were electric vehicles. And I know that they are expensive right now, but they're becoming like more and more affordable because of like new incentives and rebates. And they are cheaper in the long run because there's no gas payments and there's like fewer moving parts to pay for. And there's also a different like price range for different types of EVs. Like not every EV is a Tesla, that not every like, and I know the average person can afford a Tesla, cannot afford a Tesla. So there are different options for that. And then my next point is that there are like state legislature that require corporate participation, and these and this can include the Climate Corporate Data Accountability Act, where US companies with annual revenues exceeding $1 billion have to disclose both their direct and indirect greenhouse gas emissions by the next year, and showing how it's like can have an immediate effect because it's like in the next upcoming years. So sorry, I feel like I'm getting off topic. And the gas company, and it's saying that gas companies like Chevron and need to like track their emissions from vehicles using their gas, and then other companies like Apple, they have to account for like materials involved in the production of their products. And this does have a global impact, as like climate disclosures could be like a standard practice in both the US and like globally. And it can lead towards like meaningful corporate climate actions, which is really important because the US is one of the largest greenhouse gas emitting countries. And according to The Guardian, like big corporations are responsible for about like 70% of those emissions. And if we know the exact sources and the exact amount that they're of greenhouse gas emissions that they're emitting, then we have like a better understanding on how to prevent the same rate emissions and of emissions. And yeah, so with these like acts that California has like pushed through, we can mitigate climate change with like immediate effects and impacts. Thank you.
Okay, so I just have a few questions for you. So by transitioning from fossil fuels, there will be an economic downturn and many jobs will be lost. What do you think we should do to account for these people?
Hold on, can you give me a sec? Okay, sorry. To counter like the jobs being lost by like the fossil fuel production, there could be like new jobs offered when we like shift to like clean energy, because we still need like people to like make that happen. So there's jobs there. And then yeah, I honestly didn't really research how else.
So I know you talked about state like laws. Are there any gaps or shortcomings in existing policies that need to be like addressed?
I think that a lot of like the shortcomings that these laws have are is that like people don't like really want to do like do them. I know it's like if this law it's like required, but if people are try like resisting against it, then it's not going to be as effective. But I think if people like really understand like how important it is, then I think that we can like motivate public like the public.
Perfect. So that's like all I have.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'll start mine. Okay. As the scepter of climate change looms ever larger on the global stage, the United States finds itself at a critical juncture where decisions about mitigation and adaptation strategies will profoundly shape the nation's future. While mitigating climate change remains an imperative goal, it is becoming increasingly evident that prioritizing adaptation efforts is much more crucial. I am contending that the United States should shift its emphasis towards prioritizing adaptation over climate change mitigation, recognizing that the impacts of climate change are already underway and necessitate immediate action to safeguard communities, infrastructures, and the well-being of its citizens. By focusing on adaptations, the US can fortify its resilience against the escalating threats posed by a changing climate, thereby securing a more sustainable and secure future for generations to come. Humans have caused major climate changes to happen already, and we have set in motion more changes still. However, if we stopped emitting greenhouse gases today, the rise in global temperatures would begin to flatten within a few years. Temperatures would then plateau but remain well elevated for many, many centuries. This quote from NASA in their article, "Is it too late to prevent climate change?" shows that we need to put a complete total halt to greenhouse gases in order for us to alleviate climate change, in order for the global temperature to just flatten. It won't reduce any of the natural disasters going on. It merely plateaus the temperature, and it won't be for many centuries before temperatures start to decrease. To even get to the point of stopping the emission of greenhouse gases might take a century. According to the United States Environmental Protection Agency in 2021, the US produced 6,340 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent. That's around 14 trillion pounds. To expect the US to completely diminish the production of greenhouse gases is a plan that will take many years in itself. And even after we achieve this, we need to wait many centuries before this change even starts to have an impact and decrease global temperatures. Climate change disproportionately affects vulnerable communities and nations that have contributed the least to greenhouse gas emissions. Developing countries will suffer the most from the impacts of climate change. According to the National Library of Medicine, the poorest and least powerful people have already live in a situation with poor water supply and sanitation, which is compounded by natural disasters. We need to start by helping these developing countries adapt. Developing countries have already tried to adapt. In a research project by Adaptive in South Africa, they state people are adapting by planting fast maturing crops, eating wild fruits, collecting wild seeds, selling their animals, seeking paid work in town, and trying to start up cash generating businesses. But it is clear that there is a limit on how much these developing countries have. Some ways developing countries can develop include early warning systems. A warning system that warns them early can reduce subsequent damage by 30%. Ecosystem restoration is very good for adapting, as a single tree provides the cooling effect as air conditioners, two air conditioners running for 2 hours. Mangrove trees are very efficient in providing natural sea defenses from storm surges by reducing the height and strength of sea waves. Mangroves are 1,000 times less expensive than building seawalls. Climate-resistant infrastructure, assets, and systems such as roads, bridges, and power lines that can withstand shocks from extreme climate impacts. Infrastructure is very important as it is responsible for 88% of forecasted costs for adapting to climate change. In conclusion, as the United States grapples with the escalating challenges posed by climate change, the imperative to strike a balance between mitigation and adaptation strategies becomes increasingly apparent. While mitigating greenhouse gas emissions remains crucial for the long-term health of the planet, the urgency of adapting to the existing and anticipated impacts cannot be overstated. Done.
Okay, I think I'll be asking questions.
Okay.
My first question is that I'm not sure if you said it or not, or if I missed it, but you said that like doing like a total like halt to like greenhouse gas emissions, it
Yeah.
takes like centuries and centuries, would take centuries to do. Did you have like a source for that, or
Let me see. Greenhouse. Yes, I quoted from NASA in their article, "Is it too late to
okay?
prevent climate change?" Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And
Mhm.
then my next question is, to what extent would we keep having to like adapt to climate change before like we can't adapt anymore, if that makes sense?
Yes. Well, we need to adapt first because even if we do mitigate, these like developing countries will still be affected by climate change. So like as I stated, even if we reach net zero emission, it won't reduce any of the natural disasters until like many centuries afterwards when the temperatures start to decrease. So by adapting first, it allows the developing countries to not be as badly affected by climate change.
Okay, and my next question is that can developing countries afford to make all of these adoptions? Because you were talking about like resistant like infrastructure and like ecosystem restorations, which are all good adaptations, but they seem expensive to
Hmm.
implement.
I wrote my debate as in like the US helps these developing countries. So I don't know. Oh yeah, my like initial thought wasn't for the developing countries to generate their own money because they've tried with their own money and it didn't turn out to be effective. So that's why the US needs to go in and help them. And also because like a lot of these like um a lot of this climate change is due to the US like is due to the US. Yes, in statement. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'll be talking next. Um, so what are the limits in technology of our ecosystem as a society for adapting to a worsening climate? If we choose to adapt instead of mitigate, we're soon going to reach our limits. So we must choose to mitigate rather than adapt because of the ecological, societal, and economical benefits of mitigation rather than adaptation. And then you guys argue that it is possible to decrease or lower global warming and things like that. And sure, like completely halting isn't necessarily realistic, but we can work on it and it definitely is possible. Um, and like you guys had also talked about how we need to adapt now, but mitigation needs to happen. And that's why we think that mitigation needs to be the priority over adaptation because we can make small adaptation movements, but the main priority needs to be on mitigation because there is a limit to adaptation and we cannot adapt forever because global warming will just get worse if we don't focus on mitigation. Um, and then you guys also talked about how the US can help other countries that are suffering from global hunger and things like that. And we know that poverty and like hunger and crops dying like in certain countries due to oh my gosh due to climate change is just oh my, is going to worsen with climate change. And so according to the USGAO, which is a government agency that basically is holding our own government accountable for what they're doing, found that we spend 4 billion per year to provide international food support, yet still 828 million people are regularly experiencing hunger. So if this is already a problem that and the US is already giving so much to these other countries, that's just going to worsen if we don't help solve the root problem of most of the cause of hunger, which is crop loss. So the World Health Organization reported in an article in 2020 that 770 million people face hunger globally. They also stated that climate change affects food availability, quality, and diversity, which is worsening the food and nutrition crisis in our world. And a study titled Genetic Manipulation for Improved Nutritional Quality in Rice, published in 2020 by Frontier in Genetics, found that the rise in CO2 concentration in the atmosphere is causing a decrease in the protein and minerals found in crops, specifically rice, which is the main food source for over 2 billion people around the world. And they documented a decrease in protein, iron, zinc, and various B vitamins in 18 different rice strands. And this problem cannot simply be adapted to forever. Sure, there are genetically modified crops and organisms that people do use to add more protein and things like that. And they did mention these in that study, but without addressing the root cause of the mutation in these crops, there's no way to guarantee that they won't continue to mutate because of carbon dioxide levels and other things contributing to global warming. And they also found that because of the lack of food diversity, we can also see an increase in obesity in certain well-developed countries because of the lack of access to fruits and vegetables, and also the rising costs with those, especially within our lower and middle class in our country. So we'll be seeing an increase in malnutrition in underdeveloped countries and an increase in obesity in well-developed countries. All because we cannot get the proper food to places they need to be as it is now. And that's only going to get worse as major environmental disasters affect transportation, as, for example, like carbon dioxide is changing the nutritional quality of crops that are heavily relied on. And instead, we need to focus on reducing carbon emissions. And that, as my partner talked about, can do with day-to-day life changes, switching from single-use plastic to using electric vehicles and things like that. But we also have the technology to actually remove carbon dioxide in the air. They just need to be implemented. So like one example is like direct air capture, which involves removing CO2 from the air and chemically scrubbing it and storing it underground. And then there's also like an ocean and natural based approach, which just involves planting more kelp forest because within our ocean, which will also help protect our environment. But these large kelp forests are actually a very natural way that our environment sequesters CO2 for long periods of time. So that's a more natural approach as well. It's very realistic and can also help save our oceans. My next point is that choosing to adapt will be significantly more costly in the long run rather than mitigation. The PBL Netherlands Environmental Assessment Agency published a study in 2014 that said the estimated annual adaptation costs are projected to be about $100 billion in US dollars, but the mitigation will take time to emerge, but they're projected to outweigh the upfront cost eventually. So there was a graph on this website and it showed that the adaptation costs are going to continue to rise, whereas the mitigation costs have a sharp increase and then a decrease after that, and continue to decrease over time. And then the countries most responsible for climate change actually are founded to be the least impacted by climate change. So it's not right for the US to focus on adaptation rather than mitigation when we're one of the causing problems and leaders in our current problems with climate change. And we're not even suffering the major consequences from them yet. And we are focusing on adaptation rather than mitigation, even though we're the ones causing other countries to adapt. One of the 10 biggest emitters of CO2 in the world, of the 10 biggest emitters of CO2 in the world per capita, the US is number 4. Yet when we look at the 74 poorest countries, they produce only 1/10 of the world's greenhouse gases, yet they're the most affected by climate change, according to the World Economic Forum. So it's just not ethical of us to focus on our own adaptations when other countries are being affected by our actions and the amount of CO2 we are emitting. So in conclusion, we must work to mitigate climate change instead of adapting to its effects, because we cannot reverse the harm that climate change is causing and will cause.
Okay, give me 1 second. I honestly don't know what to ask. Give me 1 second. Okay, I just wanted to ask, so you talked about storing CO2 underground. How would that work?
So it's a process that scientists have studied, and it's called direct air capture. So basically, there's like big plantations that are going to like take in air from our atmosphere. And then there's like this chemical process that I don't fully understand, but there's a chemical process that breaks down the carbon dioxide. And so it's removes the carbon dioxide from the other like gases in the air, and then it releases those gases, and then it takes the CO2 and like stores it. So some scientists like want to find a way to use that CO2 as like renewable energy, and like find some way to convert CO2 into energy that like isn't going to emit like more harmful gases. So like, but the current plan is just to basically take the air from the atmosphere and remove the carbon dioxide, and then re-release the air without the carbon dioxide.
Okay, that would just be my only question. I honestly don't know what to ask. So I'm done.
Thank you.
All right, should we group huddle? Group huddle? All right, cool. All right, so we'll go first. I'm gonna go next. So the way the other team did it was like you guys like just turned down your volume or something, right? Is that how you did it? And then yeah? Because last night, yeah. Okay, we'll do that. All right, so team, you want to start talking?
Yeah.
Okay,
I'm just gonna trust you guys are on mute and not like an op right now. An op.
No.
that's crazy.
Okay.
Okay.
So they talked, okay,
They talked about a lot of like different countries, and I was like,
which is kind of good because I did kind of do a little bit of research on that.
"Oh, you did?
A
Okay."
little
Because
bit.
I
Not
didn't. That's
too
why I
much.
was stuck on her second question. I was like,
Oh,
only focused on the U.S.
Well,
okay.
actually, maybe.
I didn't know what to ask because it was like she started with a rebuttal, and then it was like, wait, what's happening? And then I guess like afterwards, all the points that she like gave, she also just like backed it up really well. So I was like,
Yeah,
dang.
she did use a lot of like evidence and stuff, which was really good.
Ah,
Yeah.
if I cross-examine
Maybe.
Annabelle, I feel like I would have better questions.
To be honest, I'm gonna treat this like another argument. It's kind of what I
Okay.
Yeah.
it's kind of what I
Yeah.
typically do anyways.
Mhm.
But I do have one response to Bella's thing about how it's really expensive, more expensive than mitigation. And it was like a
Yeah.
quote from like just some article. And it was saying how like we're investing 1.8 trillion into adaptation.
Yeah, I think I
But
had something like that too.
yeah, but
I remember
we're generating more like money, like like 5 times more money than that, which is a lot.
Yeah.
So it's really good, and that just points to like, you know,
Yeah.
if we want to go into we want to talk about the developing countries a lot, we can like put that into that, because they keep bringing it up
Yeah.
and like actually put that argument towards that if we want to, which is probably what I'm gonna say.
I think
Yeah.
that's a good idea because I think
Um,
more
yeah.
Also,
probable.
for one of Annabelle's points, she said like there's like EVs, but then when I was doing research, mining for lithium is actually more hurtful than just using um fossil fuels. So I don't know if you want to add that.
I probably won't add
Okay,
that.
no, that's fine. That's fine. No, no, you're
I
good.
don't
It's
know
just if
enough.
you don't have enough points, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I could
Mhm.
probably no, yeah. I
No, no,
think
no, 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 you don't have to. It's just if you don't have enough points, that's something you can add. But if you're good, don't add it. Yeah.
for sure. For sure, for sure. All right, I'm ready. Honestly, I want to get this over with early, to be
Okay.
Okay,
honest.
perfect.
Like an hour before my other class. Okay. So
Okay.
yeah. All right, you guys are good, right?
Mm. Oh, yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I'm the last talking point here, and I'm going to respond to a little bit of your points that you've made about mitigation. But I also kind of treat this like another talking point as well. So expect like just more points and evidence. So I'm Joaquin, I'm defending adaptation here. Keep in mind that adaptation is not a singular answer. It's a wide range of different solutions that can be implemented into, you know, basically helping reduce climate change over time. I think it's important to know that that instead of like despite mitigation being like a very worldwide effort and trying to basically like reverse it and just stop it as like as soon and immediate as possible. Adaptation is a slow process, and we're able to kind of like take pieces and of different locations in different countries and kind of find what works for their situation best and basically just do that. And um if it takes a lot of funding from like more like wealthier countries like the US, and that's what it takes pretty much. So I'm gonna actually use an example on how we can do that from a smaller scale, because I think it's important to know that adaptation isn't just like I said with mitigation, like a worldwide effort. I mean, it is in the grand scheme of it, but I think it's important to know that we have to start somewhere, and that's obviously like we have to start small. And I use the example of Boston, which was kind of a random thing I gathered in research, and it was a situation in 2007 where they created this thing called the Climate Ready Boston Adaptation Plan, where they just kind of went from like their idea of adaptation was basically doing research on what's going to affect them in the later years, and then just kind of gathering all of their departments and their sub departments and basically kind of like making them do actions, or sorry, making them act on, let's say, like neighborhoods and emergency responses, homeland securities. I don't know what that's about, and then economic levels. So these are all like just like different categories on a smaller scale that they were able to implement into the city of Boston. And so I think this is just really important because um, I feel like it's kind of a cheaper route to take. I didn't do too much research on why it'd be cheaper, but I just think that it's because there's just so many endless possibilities on how you can adapt with all of those small little scale little departments there. Um, just because you can become sustainable, preserving. And I think that, oh God, I'm kind of losing my track here a little bit. Basically they were just trying to make they're trying to prioritize things locally, because I know that like for a city like that it can be very state like the state would have to like really much focus on that, so they wanted to make things very local because that they've seen that those are more urgent. And also I just think that's just like a very like a chain reaction of events on like how that can lead to like smaller kind of just expanding out, and then and just showing progress over time, and overall just yeah the whole city changing in general. That was poor explanation. Okay, I'm gonna move on. I do have a source here, or a quote from the UN.org that says at COP26 countries adopted the Glasgow Climate Pact, which calls for a doubling of finance to support developing countries in adapting to the impacts of climate change and building resilience. So yeah, that's like you guys kind of stated a lot about developing countries and what we could do about them. And they actually did create a solution, and that's what I just stated. It was the Glasgow Climate Pact. And that, they're just gonna be putting a lot of funding or a lot of support and finance into that. really important. And I didn't get the information on when that when the goal was, when the end year was to meet that. But like that is an effort that is being currently made besides like the Paris Agreement Act, which we know is just like by like 2030 or 2050 or something like that, to just reduce it by like 30% or greenhouse gases and carbon emissions. Okay, but moving on to like a larger scale, I had another quote, which is a response to you, which was that globally, a $1.8 trillion investment in early warning systems, climate resilient infrastructures, improved agriculture, global mangrove protection along coastlines, and resilient water resources could generate $7.1 trillion through a combination of avoided costs and a variety of social and environmental benefits. So yeah, that's like 5 times or so times the amount that we're spending in the investment, and we're actually gaining a lot of money from that, which kind of speaking of developing countries, we can put that into that is exactly like whatever works for their situation best. And if they can't handle it themselves on, by the money that they have or the resources that they have, we can kind of put those efforts into that, if we're going to be investing that much in the first place. Also, I think it's important to note that adaptation is just like we're very big on just like creating better infrastructure, because it's all about like sustainability and like being able to just kind of work with what we got, like with the more extreme weathers and just climate changes that are going to be happening in the future. I just wrote basically that from the funding that I was explaining earlier, from that 7.1 trillion benefits, we could put that into just infrastructures, preventing landslides on mountains, also just like better water systems in cities, expanding the space that they have so that there isn't like a overflow of water that probably could get worse. And yeah, okay. And then lastly, I wrote here, so I'm kind of just going based off I wrote it in a really interesting way here. I have another quote from another website, the WWF, saying that we are working with leading humanitarian organizations and governments to provide guidance and training on better policies and practices for integrating the environment in disaster response and building resiliency for communities impacted by or at risk of disasters. And ultimately, the decision here is a slow adaptive process, as it would take many years to get something like this to impact many places, but in the end, it is still providing the change that pro-adaptation researchers are looking for for many years so that we can see change. It all prevents all sorts of social and environmental risks, especially in latter years when we are seeing drastic changes in places that oh, never mind. I'm not gonna say that part. But yeah, I think that like in general, like when we're starting to see, the whole point was that when we're starting to see places that, for example, were dry and are now starting to get like floods or starting to get an abundance of water that they're not used to. I think it's important that like for mitigation, I feel like there's a chance of them tampering or messing with that climate that they're not used to. So that's something that like the adaptive like process would help with, is that just making those slow changes in making like support systems and like making sure that those things don't happen. Because it's just so like unsure of the future. Like the future is just so uncertain on what can happen with certain places. So yeah, that's I think in the broad scheme of things, it's kind of just like not taking a chance, but just being safe. And that's all I have. So if you guys want to do your little group huddle, we can give you time here.
Okay, I think we're good. I think we did it when you guys were doing your
Cool.
huddle. So,
All right, cool. Yeah.
so I'm gonna start off. And unlike what you guys said before, mitigation isn't a complete halt of greenhouse gas emissions. It's, according to NASA, it's like reducing the flow of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And just like the word like reducing, it just means that it's more like manageable than completely stopping. Because like I agree, completely stopping greenhouse gas emissions isn't really achievable in the near future, but reducing it is like definitely something we can do, I think. And then to do that, like we said before, we can use like solutions like direct air capture and ocean management, and daily applications. And like ocean management includes, like Bella said, like kelp forests. And according to a BBC report last year, globally, like seaweeds, including kelp, have sequestered nearly 200 million tons of carbon dioxide, which is a lot of carbon dioxide, which definitely helps mitigate the carbon emissions in the ocean. And then, like I said before, like daily applications, reducing single-use plastics, and that is something we can do every day, and that does have an immediate effect. And then all of the three processes I mentioned and more that we mentioned earlier all work to remove carbon dioxide in the environment and the atmosphere through both chemical and natural processes.
And then we also talked about how okay, wait, can you guys hear me again? Okay, my thing like kicked me off. Okay. So basically mitigation is more cost effective than adaptation in the long term. And there will be more upfront costs with mitigation, but overall, as we continue to reduce carbon emissions and build a more sustainable lifestyle for our country, these will lower. And then our other point was that with adaptation, you're just playing catch up to the effects of climate change, and we're never getting in front of it and actually stopping it. And the US needs to take action to make up for their personal excess emissions, because we are responsible for a majority of carbon emissions, as well as like with other very developed countries. And that has to do with a lot of our consumerism. And it's just not ethical for us to ask other underdeveloped countries to adapt, even when we're offering aid. Like, it's not fair for us to ask them to adapt to problems we're causing. And even currently, we're not able to fully meet their needs. So it's basically like not fair to tell them to adapt, even though we're like already not helping them with that. Even though we're giving them resources, it's just not enough. So that's our argument. Thank you.
All right, we're done recording. That's it,
Oh,
right?
okay. Hold on. I do have a question for you guys.
Okay.
Two actually. When I was talking, like for the rebuttal thing, my screen was like glitching out, so I don't know if you guys actually heard what I was saying.
I heard it. Yeah.
Okay, that's
You're
good.
good.
And then the second thing is